Chapter 18, Part 2, continuing with the discussion of the effects of eating the wild potato seeds right here. The effects of the poisoning are chronic. The alkaloid rarely kills outright. The toxin does the deed insidiously, indirectly, by inhibiting an enzyme in your metabolism. It says the body is prevented from turning what it eats into a source of usable energy. If you ingest too much, you are bound to starve no matter how much food you put into your stomach. Imagine this when you're already really lean and you're not putting a lot of calories in every day. Like, it's a recipe for disaster. Animals will sometimes recover after they stop eating it, but you have to be in fairly robust condition to begin with. A large store of proteins and sugars must be present to mop up the poison and wring it from the body. And that wouldn't happen with McCandless, right? The problem, says Professor Bryant, is if you're lean and hungry to begin with, you're obviously not going to have any glucose and protein to spare. So there's no way to flush the toxin from your system. When a starving mammal ingests an alkaloid, even one as benign as caffeine, it's going to hit him much harder than it normally would because of the lack of glucose reserves necessary to excrete the stuff. The alkaloid is simply going to accumulate in the system. If McCandless ate a big slug of these seeds while he was already in a semi-starving condition, it could have been a setup for a catastrophe. Laid low by the toxic seeds, McCandless discovered he was suddenly far too weak to hike out and save himself. He was now too weak even to hunt effectively, and thus grew weaker still, sliding closer and closer toward starvation. His life was spiraling out of control with awful speed. There are no journal entries for July 30th or August 1st. On August 2nd, the diary says, terrible wind. Autumn was just around the corner. The temperature was dropping and the days were becoming noticeably shorter. Each rotation of the earth held 7 fewer minutes of daylight and 7 more cold and darkness. In the span of a single week, the night grew nearly an hour longer. Day 100. Made it, he noted jubilantly on August 5th, proud of achieving such a significant milestone. But in weakest condition of life, death looms as a serious threat. Too weak to walk out, have literally become trapped in the wild. No game. If McCandless had possessed a U.S. Geological Survey topographic map, it would have alerted him to the existence of a Park Service cabin on the upper Susquehanna River, 6 miles due south of the bus, a distance he might have been able to cover even in a severely weakened state. This cabin, just inside the boundary of Denali National Park, had been stocked with a small amount of emergency food, bedding, first aid supplies for the use of backcountry rangers on their winter patrols. Again, this is going back to him not having accurate maps of the time. McCandless's apparent salvation, in other words, seemed to be only a 3-hour walk upriver. The sad irony was widely noted in the aftermath of his death. But even if he had known about these cabins, they wouldn't have delivered McCandless from harm. At some point after mid-April, when the last of the cabins was vacated as the spring thaw made dog mushing and snow machine travel problematic, somebody broke into all 3 cabins and vandalized them extensively. The food inside was exposed to animals and weather, ruining it. The damage wasn't discovered until late July when a wildlife biologist named Paul Atkinson made the grueling 10-mile bushwhack over the outer range from the road into Denali National Park to the shelter. He was shocked and baffled. They thought it was bear, but they weren't sure if it was vandalism, blah, blah, blah. And they go on talking about if it was trashed or not. Right here, they say they actually thought McCandless was a suspect in trashing it. And then they were like, but no way, he wasn't the kind of guy to do it. And he was no vandal and blah, blah, blah. So they just take a side note talking about that cabin being vandalized and did McCandless do it or not. And they decide there's no way he would have. There are no entries in McCandless's journal for August 6th, 7th, and 8th. On August 9th, he notes that he shot a bear, but missed. August 10th saw a caribou but didn't get a shot off, and he killed 5 squirrels. If a sufficient amount of swansonine had accumulated in his body, however, this windfall of small game would have provided little nourishment. On August 11th, he killed and ate 1 ptarmigan. On August 12th, he dragged himself out of the bus to forage for berries after posting a plea for assistance in the unlikely event that someone would stop by while he was on his way. Written in meticulous block letters on a page torn from Gogol's, it reads, SOS, I need your help. I'm injured, near death, too weak to hike out of here. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. I am out collecting berries close by and shall return this evening. Thank you. This is the SOS note they found taped outside the bus when they found him, by the way. Remember back in like chapter 2? He signed the note, Chris McCandless, August. Recognizing the gravity of his predicament, he abandoned the cocky moniker he'd been using for years, Alexander Supertramp, in favor of the name given to him at birth by his parents. He used his real name signing this. Many Alaskans have wondered why, in his desperation, McCandless didn't start a forest fire at this point as a distress signal. There were 2 nearly full gallons of stove gas in the bus. Presumably, it would have been a simpler matter to start a conflagration large enough to attract the attention of passing airplanes, or at least burn a giant SOS into the muskeg. Contrary to common belief, however, the bus doesn't lie beneath any established flight path, and very few planes fly over it. Over the 4 days I spent on the Stampede Trail, I didn't see a single aircraft overhead other than commercial jets flying at altitudes greater than 25,000 feet. Small planes did no doubt pass within sight of the bus from time to time, but McCandless would probably have had to start a fairly large forest fire to be sure of attracting their attention. And as Corinne points out, Chris would never, ever intentionally burn down a forest, not even to save his life. Anybody who would suggest otherwise doesn't understand the first thing about my brother. Starvation is not a pleasant way to expire. In advanced stages of famine, as the body begins to consume itself, the victim suffers muscle pain, heart disturbances, loss of hair, dizziness, shortness of breath, extreme sensitivity to cold, physical and mental exhaustion. The skin becomes discolored. In the absence of key nutrients, a severe chemical imbalance develops in the brain, inducing convulsions and hallucinations. Some people who have been brought back from the far edge of starvation, though, report that near the end, the hunger vanishes, the terrible pain dissolves, and the suffering is replaced by a sublime euphoria, a sense of calm accompanied by transcendent mental clarity. It would be nice to think McCandless experienced a similar rapture. On August 12th, he wrote what would prove to be the final words in his journal. Beautiful blueberries. From August 13th through the 18th, his journal records nothing beyond a tally of the days. At some point during this week, he tore the final page from Louis L'Amour's memoir. On one side of the page were some lines L'Amour had quoted from Robinson Jeffers' poem, Wise Men in Their Bad Hours. Death's a fierce meadowlark, but to die, having made something more equal to the centuries than muscle and bone, is mostly to shed weakness. The mountains are dead stone. The people admire or hate their stature, their insolent quietness. The mountains are not softened or troubled, and a few dead men's thoughts have the same temper. On the other side of the page, which was blank, McCandless penned a brief adios. I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. Then he crawled into the sleeping bag his mother had sewn for him and slipped into unconsciousness. He probably died on August 18th, 112 days after he walked into the wild, 19 days before 6 Alaskans would happen across the bus and discover his body inside. One of his last acts was to take a picture of himself, standing near the bus, under the high Alaska sky, one hand holding his final note toward the camera lens, and the other raised in a brave, beatific farewell. His face is horribly emaciated, almost skeletal. But if he pitied himself in those last difficult hours, because he was so young, because he was all alone, because his body had betrayed him and his will had let him down, it's not apparent from the photograph. He's smiling in the picture, and there's no mistaking the look in his eyes. Chris McCandless was at peace, serene as a monk gone to God. And that's the end, you guys. That's how it ends. He winds up dying, and they do a follow-up, like now that they have more modern testing, basically, you guys, more like scientific evidence testing and stuff like that. They've actually done tests and stuff, and they found out for sure, there's a follow-up article to this written just a couple of years ago, that he did eat the wild potato seeds. That's what made him, like, the alkaloids in it made it really highly toxic, and the fact that he was in caloric deficit is what led to his death. So they find out for certain that that's what happened to him. All right, there is an epilogue in the book, guys. If you look, it's like the last 2 to 3 pages of your book. And what happens is the mom and dad go out to the bus. Okay, so they talk about here how the family's in Alaska. They want to go in and hike the trail and get to the bus so they can kind of, they can feel kind of what McCandless felt and get close to him that way. But what happens is it's so like wild terrain and the river's so high and stuff when they go to do it that they have to helicopter in. And Billy's a little upset. The mom is a little upset over it because she wanted to, feel what McCandless did. But regardless, they wind up taking a helicopter in, and she goes in and she looks at some of his stuff, and because some of his stuff is still in that bus, you guys, she picks up some things and she's like, oh my God, it smells just like Chris. And it talks about her like going through his things and stuff. And then she leaves a suitcase there, basically. And she puts a bunch of supplies in it, like that you would use in the woods and stuff like that to like help anybody out. And she leaves a note that says, please call your parents. And then basically they hike out of there. They say how they're learning to like grieve and get over it, but it's still hard like every day for the rest of their lives. They helicopter out, and that's the end. All right, guys. That winds up the whole book. If, again, like I skipped through some of it that you want to go back and read, feel free, guys. You have the book here. Just go back to the chapters that you might be interested in. Otherwise, that's the end.